So yeah, we were inviting some members of a Six Nomads community. As you remember, you were
Cool.
a part of remote conference we did in January. So some people who are also with us on this conference, some people who are using our platform too, and some new, fresh people for whom I want to just maybe a simple description of who we are and what is Six Nomads, if you don't mind, guys. So yeah, Six Nomads is a recruiting platform, and we aim to do recruiting of engineers as affordable and as easy as possible. We actually want to eliminate the need of recruiting agencies, because now with all the tech that we have, the recruiting should be much easier. So we have a marketplace where great remote teams, where remote teams are finding their perfect talents for their needs. And now it's working for engineers and product designers. And I think it's time to introduce Jake here. He's a co-founder of Grain. And yeah, I will give you the floor to tell us about what Grain is.
Great, awesome. Everybody can hear me well? We're good? Okay, cool. Yeah, so hi, I'm Jake. I'm calling in from Menlo Park, California, just south of San Francisco. I am the co-founder of Grain. I started about 1.5 years ago with my brother, actually. And so Grain is the best place to capture and share your video highlights from your Zoom calls. So we're actually using Grain right now. And so what happens is when you use Grain, a little notepad pops open, allows you to take notes alongside your Zoom call. Those notes get synced up with the recording. And then after the call's over, a little window pops open and you can click on one of those notes and share a clip and you can trim the clip by using the transcript. And yeah, if you're interested, go ahead and check it out at grain.co. We're in early access right now. And so one of the core benefits is rather than sending a full recording, you just send the best parts or the highlights.
Do you want to share a quick demo of how it works or not? Just tell me if you want to share the screen and show it.
Sure, I can show you something that will look like after the fact. So 1 second, let me find something that's great. You can all see my screen. So this is Grain. So this was a Zoom call that we had syncing up with the design team and our CTO. So you see all the participants that were in the Zoom call. This is the full recording of the call. And these are all the notes that we took during the call. So we only took, 5 or so notes over the 34 minutes. And here's some of the clips we created. And this is actually one that we sent out. And so basically what happened here is you see that it's 32 minutes into the 34-minute call. Actually created a clip of the summary of the conversation. And so using my note as like that bookmark. Actually, I will share my volume so you can all hear it.
I think the solve here is nothing changes functionally except for
you can see the transcript over here.
The first time UX window.
Got it. And so we could create a new clip and let me show you what that would look like. And let's actually create it here towards the end where we're actually talking. And so you'll see the transcript over here.
Test this. Love it.
This is where it breaks down. This is where COVID is hard, man. It's like when you're trying
to. So we're talking about the pains of probably communicating there. And you can just highlight the transcript and it will actually trim down to just that part of the conversation.
This is where it breaks down. This is where COVID is hard, man.
And then you can take these clips and just share them around. So if we open up in a new window, even if it was incognito, you could share it.
I think the solve here is
right? And if we actually looked at this, you'll see that like I posted this in the product channel, and then you'll see the dialogue around this conversation, and you'll see several members with our team talking, and some dialogue there. Make sense? Any questions?
Yeah.
And so those are embedded and built in Slack. You can just send the short part of the call as opposed to the whole recording.
What are the use cases? Give us the use cases. How can I use it, and why do I want to do that?
Yeah, good question. So we actually started on this version of the product focusing on product teams, particularly doing user research. We found that to be a particularly salient use case for being able to share highlights from your customer calls and relay those back to the team. So that's one of our core use cases, is being able to sort of magnify the voice of the customer inside the organization. So we've been focusing on that for like the last 4 to 5 months, and then a pandemic hit, and turned out everybody ended up being on Zoom. And so we ended up kind of opening up to a variety of use cases. And some of those other use cases are, for example, team meetings. We use it for all our calls. We record everything. And that way it allows me to sit in a meeting and then relay back from the actual dialogue, those, minute or 2 minutes that were actually worth listening to, as opposed to the whole conversation. So it really helps us stay in the loop as far as like the conversations we're having. And then trainings are a big thing as well, consulting, marketing, events like this. So we're seeing a large variety of use cases in the workplace, but also on the personal level. So my wife actually is pregnant and due in a couple weeks. And because she couldn't get together with anybody, we had a remote baby shower yesterday.
Oh my God.
And so she opened up some presents screen on Zoom, and watched a video that several of her sisters and aunts had sent to her, and she screen shared that and showed that, and it was actually a really awesome moment, because then we can send that clip of the conversation back to those that weren't able to attend, and they can still be there. And there's some sweet moments there.
Oh, this is so cute. And I wanted to ask you about the Zoom integration. Why Zoom? And are you going to expand to any other video tools?
Yeah, good question. So originally, when we had this idea, we realized the power of the Zoom API, and so we had thought about potentially building out our own solution to be able to, easily record and share Zoom calls, and at that point in time, even when we started, we didn't actually have this concept of highlights. It was really just take notes that sync up with your recording. And we thought about, using something like a WebRTC solution. There's a variety of different tools you can use. But, I put on the loose, 1 second. We back?
Yeah.
Cool. So anyways, yeah, so Zoom, we realized that we weren't video codec people. Like these people that were building Zoom had spent decades building video conferencing solutions. And we weren't experts there. So, and what we were really trying to do was solve that next layer of connectivity on top of this, on top of video conferencing, and realized that Zoom had really created a step function in the quality of Zoom calls and the reliability there. So now we can actually do something with these calls, and how can we leverage them? And that's what really where we started playing with. And so they currently, I think, have the best solution when it comes to video conferencing, and they also have the most robust API. And so they allow us to do everything we want to do. And it's not always easy building on top of a platform, but they're super helpful, and and we've been able to create some compelling solutions.
Yeah, it's really not easy to being like on top of the anything else. And I also wanted to ask you, there was some during the COVID, there was some issues with Zoom. Did it affect you in any way?
Yeah, good question. So they scaled immensely. What was it, to up to like 300 million daily participants from like in the 40s or something like that. It was pretty incredible, just within the period of, you know, days and weeks. I was actually, I think it's a very unique engineering accomplishment what they did. And what was actually pretty interesting is that we didn't actually experience that many issues with the API during that time. There were a couple webhooks that we had that were they stopped publishing. So like there's some things that kind of made building and using Grain difficult. So Grain, actually you can take notes together, but they stopped allowing us to know when other people joined the meeting. So there was slight degradation there. But I was actually very impressed with how well it performed, given all the insane load that happened.
Yeah, that was impressive. I mean, with the growth they had, they experienced like a massive growth of users. That is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah.
For this kind
Yeah,
of
and I've been in similar situations. So on my last company, Branch, we provided deep linking infrastructure for top 500 apps, and so basically what happens is they would ping our API every time one of the users would open or close an application or click on a link, etc. And so you'd imagine that like we were starting to scale out the product, and Pinterest turns on the Branch SDK, and so you have millions and millions of users opening and closing and creating events inside the platform. And so I've been in those shoes where you're just trying to make sure everything stays up and running. And so given my experience there and seeing how they performed, I was very impressed.
Yeah, talking about the like growth, Grain is also a startup, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
Actually, I wanted to ask you some, simple startup questions. For example, about the MVP. So, how long were you guys developing an MVP for this kind of product?
Really long time.
I mean,
so this is where Dennis and Kenzia can know, but we actually had an existing product that they had used, and we were kind of trialing to figure out if we could get an application there, and with the 6 Nomads platform. And so we had built a version for almost 10 months and couldn't quite find product market fit. It was complicated. There's a lot of things wrong with it, but what it did is it helped us unlock the solution that we have today. And so basically what we did is we realized we were struggling to find like solid use cases, realized there was like, we were asking our users to do a lot of behavior change. Like you used to have to use like our links in your calendar invites, and there's this Google document. It was really complicated. And so what we did is we looked at all the different use cases that we had. And so this is about a year into the company, about 10 months into that version of the product. And we looked at all the different use cases and found the ones that were the most salient and the least complicated, actually. And where their existing problems were like, and the effort they were putting into solving those problems were immense. And so one of the use cases we had was, customer success, but it was very complicated. You're trying to share these documents that sync up with the recording with your clients or recruiting, and trying to relay those things. And we even entertained and played around with an API there, but nothing was really landing. And then we started looking into like the moments where it was super helpful for us, and some of the recent conversations we'd had with people were around user interviews, and realized that was actually a pretty simple workflow where you're talking with a customer once. And so we started to kind of break that down and realize that people were spending hours and days editing recordings from their user interviews. So they'd record these calls, they would open them up in QuickTime, find the highlights, but they'd have to rewatch it several times to find the highlight. They'd they'd edit it in in like iMovie or Final Cut, etc. And then they'd string these together, and it would take, you know, several days to do this type of work. And we realized that like one of the biggest problems is actually trying to find the stuff that you're actually, the quotes or the moments that you're really wanting to relay back to the team. And we had that data. And so we really took, we have kind of this philosophy that around sort of pivoting, that you can either, with a product, you can take, there's three things. You can do N+1, which is take your existing product and add a new feature, really trying to find product market fit. You can take your existing, and so you're just doing that one by one, trying to find, ship new features, see if they stick. And then you can take your existing product and do and what we call N², and apply a whole new version on top of your existing product that is just as large. Sometimes that works. Or you can, what we call, you can take the square root of N. So you can take your existing product and really trim it down to those core features, those core interactions that people really value. And that's what we did. And then build up the new version on top of that core interaction. And so what we realized is that the thing we were finding the most valuable from our existing product of this Zoom, Google Doc, calendar integration was that we had these notes that were sort of bookmarks to a recording, a pointer to a moment in time. And so we tore it all down and built up the new product on that concept alone. And so that's something that was super helpful for us to find product market fit, is really trim it down and try to keep that prototype, that core product, as simple as possible. And so we ended up redesigning everything with several new team members that we added, and we prototyped that and did some evaluative testing on that, put that in front of people, and then we ended up building it, and that was the core product in which we built everything else on top of.
So it took you 10 months to like find the product market fit, to redevelop what you already like started. But I mean, after that, as far as I know, you raised a seed round and you have some very impressive users on your landing page, like Slack and Vimeo, like a really cool teams. And it all happened right in this pandemic moment. So how did you do that? Let's talk about the investments you got. What was the strategy to find it, and how did you do that?
Yeah, and so when I'm talking about this whole redesign of the product, that was around November of last year. And so we started building that out and had a prototype ready for users in January. So sort of an alpha version, actually. I mean, the prototype we had earlier, but the alpha version that we actually put in the hands of users we had in January. And so those our earliest users, some of them which are the ones you mentioned that are on our homepage, came from that first round of testing and introductions, and people that were interested in the idea, but we weren't quite solving the problem for them. So there were several users that were friends of ours or people we'd gotten acquainted with or were interested in the problem before. And then we also did a lot of user testing. So we actually used userinterviews.com. Highly recommend that if people are trying to get in front of a variety of people. Really, really great product for getting exposure to a variety of people in a really efficient way. So highly recommend that product. So what we were really doing was we're just trying to test this prototype early January and December. And many of the users that we have on our homepage, like Podium and Vimeo, actually came through people that we were just having beta test the product or really just doing interview research with. And then they converted into actual users, and then they started inviting their team. And Podium, one of our biggest users, they came through userinterviews.com, and we were just working with them to get feedback on the product. And then it started to expand within the company. So that and word of mouth and like just talking with people was the first bit. And so this everyone we have on there, we're actually just early acquaintances through our alpha program and turned into actual users.
So this is how you onboarded your first users, right? Is the website userinterviews.com, right? I'm gonna send it to the chat.
Yeah.
Cool. And how do you end up in all this, TechCrunch main page and investment thing? Because this is really interesting during this kind of times to raise an investment, and you do it successfully.
Good question. Yeah, so we hadn't planned on launching until late summer, really, to a broader audience. We're going to progressively add people and really hone in the product. And it wasn't quite in this the state that we were really looking to bring on a larger group of people with. But we realized that people were really looking for solutions to this complete change of environment. And we got introduced to a writer at TechCrunch, Connie, and story there was that we talked. My co-founder talked with her, Mike, and she was ready to write an article within the next day, even that day actually. But we're like, oh wait, let's wait a day so we can actually be ready to like accept these people. So it was a mad dash there for those 24 hours to make sure that we had systems in place to be able to allow people to, request early access and have a good experience. And I think there were some issues along the way, but for the most part, it went really well, and it was really well received. So, definitely the lesson learned there is take advantage of momentum. And we definitely felt like the product wasn't quite there, but it was very well received.
Did you get huge traffic from the TechCrunch? Did you get like a crazy traffic from it, or like semi crazy?
It's all in the eyes of the beholder, right? For us, it was great. The reception was really awesome. We had a lot of people signing up for the product, more than we could actually onboard. That's still the case. And right now what we do is we actually have a guided onboarding that we do with every new user. So we show them around Grain, make sure everything's set up for them. We get all of that, our ducks in a row to make sure that people can onboard to the product easily.
So you do it for every user? You do like live?
A live 30-minute call, yeah.
So how long? So what time do you spend on calls each day? Isn't it?
So
for the
first for the first week, we had three of us, my co-founder, Mike, me, and the member of our growth team, Max, doing these calls almost, from 9 to 5 during the day here, and then in the nights, we took some calls over the weekend, getting people on the product. One might think that's like super unintuitive and like it's a roadblock, but what it allows us to do is make sure that they're set up for success, learn from them, and teach them about the product, and really form a relationship there. And so then what we do is we, for some teams that we know are using the product, we'll set up a shared Slack channel. We also have a Grain community that we have plugged in over Slack as well that allows us to stay in touch there. So during this phase, it's all about learning from the users, finding out what they like and don't like, and what they want to change to get really get enveloped into the product.
Yeah, this is really cool. Like personal onboarding with a co-founder. I think that's a really great experience.
And so what we do now is Max is doing the vast majority of those. And at this stage in the early access, we're mostly focusing on learning as much as possible. If we increase the load, we wouldn't be learning we'd be learning where our system falls apart, right? But we wouldn't be learning about what the user needs in particular. So we actually try to keep load down. It's almost a forcing function for us to make sure we're not onboarding as many people as actually want to, and allows us to, find the people that we think really could benefit from Grain and create an awesome experience for them.
Yeah, let's come back to the investment thing. So what was this like strategy, and were you doing this, startup pitches remotely, or did you have some in real life meetings? How was it?
Yeah, good question. So when we raised the money referenced in the TechCrunch article, that was actually months prior, quite a while prior actually, and so those were all in person, and we talked to a lot of different investors, and what I found there is that when doing these pitches, the vast majority of the ones that convert are the ones that understand it right away. The ones that require a lot of explaining, it's going to really struggle for them to really get their head around the product and kind of what you're really trying to solve. So a telltale sign is just like sometimes, this is just like any advice, right? Like there's caveats and different ways that can work around, but I found as a general rule that first impressions really matter when it comes to a pitch and how well it's explained and whether somebody connects with it, whether they've been thinking about it. And so those tend to be the ones where we connect deepest with potential investors, and most likely they end up being actual investors in the end.
Yeah, it's actually, I think it's true, not only for investors, but in general, doing sales or setting up some relationships. The better someone understands you or what are you doing, the more like successfully it should be.
For sure.
The outcome. And
and then you're selling the closing rather than the opening, right?
Yeah. Do you believe in the smart money like concept? Was it like were you trying to reach out to the investors and raise this kind of smart money?
I guess just to be clear on what you mean by that, do you mean like professional investors with like funds, or versus say like, maybe angel investors?
Yeah, it's like investors who are like can give you not only money but something else, like connections, like advices, like grow, not just give you money and be on board, but also make an impact into your product.
Right. Yeah. Good question. And so I think almost everyone I've met in venture has been interested in helping and like seems like a helpful person. The reality is that investors are really busy. They have a wide variety of things that they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to support existing portfolios. They're trying to find new investments, and depending on the structure of their fund, that could be just a few a year or it can be a few a month. So totally, the bandwidth there's a lot of variance when it comes to the bandwidth of investors. I think I would primarily approach investors as a form of funding the business to get a cash inflow to make an impact with the team, right? That's primarily what investors are for. There are some, and I mean, that really will make an impact on your team. But at the end of the day, like it really comes down to what you're optimizing for. Like if you have a very specific target audience or use case, then somebody with a deep expertise there can be helpful. But as when it comes to the product, at the end of the day, it's really hard for people to give you insightful feedback when they're not a user and they're not in the weeds trying to build something with you. So when they're doing quarterly check-ins, you end up spending the vast majority of that time actually just explaining what's going on, and very little bit of feedback getting back. But some of those moments can change the company. So that's the caveat there. It's like most of that time could end up be explaining something, but there's just such a variance there. And I guess what I would say is, if you're really looking for a partner, there's two ways. It's like the best way is to find somebody that's yoked with you and that's going to be working on the product, and that's a team member. And that's the second best way is finding somebody that you know has bandwidth to actually do that, help you. And that could be through an advisor with very specific requests and an arrangement where you have expectations as far as contributions and time committed, or what exactly you're wanting to get out of that relationship. And then, or just a general feel for, how much time people are going to spend. But just be aware of that when, like you set your expectations for how much an advisor or an investor is going to be helpful, is that it depends on really what you're asking for from them, and whether they have the bandwidth to really fulfill that ask.
I have nothing to add here. You're totally right. And I think we're running out of time. So we've been talking for 40 minutes now. So maybe like 5 to 10 minutes more. I want to ask you, so we are, Six Nomads is a remote team, and this is a product for remote teams to find engineers. And we also, the advocates, we're embracing the remote work culture. And I want to ask you about your team. Do you have anyone working remotely?
Yeah, we do. We're huge fans of remote work. And when we started the company, the first 4 people in the company were actually San Francisco or Bay Area based. And so we didn't really have a reason to open up our kind of workforce to the distributed world, other than that we just realized there was a lot of opportunity there, with a lot of awesome talent throughout the world that we could partner up with. And also we're building this tool that we thought was great for remote teams, so we better learn how that works. And so the first hire after that was one of our team members, Richie from Mexico, Chihuahua, Mexico. And then the next hire after that was another Bay Area person, and then we hired somebody from Ukraine, and then another from Toronto. And before the coronavirus, our team was about 50% remote. And then since we've been in lockdown, it's been 100% distributed. And we actually are in the process of shutting down our office and going fully distributed.
Oh, really?
For the time being, until we know that it's safe to open back an office. And so it's a really, really interesting time to be a remote worker or a distributed worker. And people are really receptive as they've learned that you can be effective not being in the office all day. That's been, I've had so many conversations where people are realizing that there's something there around working, not everybody having to be in the office. So you're seeing that in the news, and these aren't just preventions because of a pandemic. They're realizing there's actual benefits, as we all know, from being remote workers. And so so it's a really, really exciting time. I don't really think of it like the trickiest thing, and this is something to be aware of if you're either building a company or if you're a remote worker, is the most painful thing about remote work now that we have, since we have these great tools that we can communicate with is time zones. So not being in, right, it's very late in Bali, yet we're trying to have this asynchronous conversation. It's getting later in Moscow. And so doing that on a daily basis, you really have to change the way you work, as opposed to changing from meetings to Zoom. It's changing the entire way you work. And so that's where we actually, when we try to have overlap around 6 hours on from Pacific Coast times.
Yeah.
And so that's the next phase for us, if we could just try to go down that into and enter that brave new world, would be to support fully distributed and async work. And so that's where we have tools like Twist and other things that really support that.
I mean, you have an office in San Francisco. Why did you get it in the first place? So what was the sense of getting the office?
Yeah, so we had a critical mass of people in the Bay Area that wanted a place to work out of. So to be clear, I think flexibility and hybrid work is actually the future, not a fully distributed organization. What we're really looking for is freedom. And some people want the freedom of being able to leave their home and go into an office. And it's really up to them. And so the only reason we're closing an office is because we can't actually occupy it right now. It's not illegal for us to do so. And so we're paying a bunch of money for us to have this office, and we can't even have people in there. Once everything's safe and we feel like we can safely congregate again, like we'd be happy to have an office here. We'd be happy to have an office in Toronto. But what we want to do is make sure that everybody is treated on a level playing field, and really the office is just a place for work, as opposed to a place where core decisions are being centralized, right? It's just an office rather than a decision hub.
But I mean, about this equality thing, isn't that hard to treat the people that you are in one space with and some remote guys the same way? I mean, if you are sitting in one space and you just coming one to each other, discussing something and stuff like that, and people that are in Toronto or in Mexico, they feel left out.
Yep. It is a big problem, and it's something you have to put a lot of energy into, and to make sure that you're compensating for those. So we do a lot there to make sure that we are even so. Before it's actually a lot easier to level the playing field when everybody's distributed. We had to have a lot of several different policies, structures in place to make sure that we were creating a very remote first environment. And so really, I mean, we were mostly operating in the fact that the headquarters was a place for, places somewhere to work out of and have meetings. Almost all of those meetings, even if it was just people in person, were recorded. And that's where Grin comes in, is it actually starts to break down those silos and create an environment for people to kind of be in the rooms in the office that they wouldn't otherwise be in. So we try to share as much information as possible, and that's how we combat that in a lot of ways. We have distributed parties, so where we will, and one of the best ways we found is playing games. So every 2 weeks we have what we call game lunch, and so during lunch we play a game. And so last game we played was Fortnite. The game before that was StarCraft, and we have a variety of different volunteers. So that's one of the ways we've helped really kind of level the playing field there.
I heard some guys were making Reddit, I think, or someone are making their daily stand-ups in Dead Redemption. So where they're riding horses, they're like in this cowboy outfits, and this is really funny.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, well, just a way to to freshen up and lighten up the life during the pandemic.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, we're all going through, some crazy stuff right now. But it's really important to find different ways of connecting. And so, we've increased our cadence for our all hands during this time as well. So there's a variety of things as we've kind of shut down the office, we've increased or created a budget for remote work as well to really create a great setup at home, et cetera. So trying to find ways of compensating for this new way of life. I dragged on there for a bit, but thanks. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for everybody listening.
Thank you for your
I
time.
hope that was helpful. Yeah, and then anybody here, feel free to email me if you have any other questions or
just
you
use Grain. Just use Grain, and if you are an Elixir developer, just send an email to jake@grain.co. Right?
Perfect. Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
That's it.